Hi folks, welcome back. I'm Janae Cherie, and today I'm going to be telling you a little bit about my experiences with testifying in court against my abuser and giving just some tips and tricks and recommendations for those of you who are in the same situation and getting prepared to testify yourself. So some brief backstory here. My father abused me from the ages of 8 to 18. He is a child molester. Without going into details of what he did, at the age of 22 in 2010, my father was arrested. It took 4 years for him to be convicted and sentenced to 14 years in prison. I did have to testify 3 separate times in court. The first time that I had to testify was at the preliminary hearing where they determine if there's enough evidence to move forward with the court case. I think that was only a couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours, I think. And then we had 2 trials. And the reason for 2 trials is that the first trial ended up in a hung jury, meaning that all of the jurors could not come to an agreement of whether he was guilty or not guilty. We did go to a second trial, and that is when he was found guilty of ongoing child abuse of a minor. That being said, I wanted to share a little bit about the tips that I have for you if you are going to be testifying in court, some recommendations based on my own experiences, as well as experiences from talking to other victims who've had to do the same, as well as some advice that I've received from attorneys, lawyers, district attorney over the years. I think it's really important that you know it and can be prepared for it, which is an opportunity I didn't necessarily have. The first thing I'll give a recommendation on is pretty self-explanatory. Get a good night's sleep. I know that it's very hard when dealing with a lot of stress to get a good night's sleep, but testifying in court is really stressful for most people. I really recommend you figure out a way to get some sleep, whether that's taking a melatonin tablet before bed, turning on some meditation videos or audios, something. Feeling rested is going to make such a difference to your mental alertness and acuity as you go into court the next day. Find your inner strength. When I say find your inner strength, everyone is different. Some people are religious, and for them that means prayer and relying on a higher power. For others, they find strength by meditating and finding it within themselves. And whatever that way is for you, the biggest thing I would say is really important to remind yourself that you are strong enough to get through this. You are already here. You've already taken enormous steps to talk to law enforcement, to report your abuser. And so this is just one more step. And you've gotten so far already. Finding a way to find that strength to get through it is really important. I know that's really hard to say because everyone's different. I actually got a little bit of strength and inspiration from an interesting source that I never would have expected. I am not religious, full transparency, but I had a good friend of mine who gave me a set of what she calls angel cards, and she had homemade them, but you can find similar things online, and I'll see if I can find a similar one and tag it in the comments. But it had angels, and the other side of the cards had things like words of inspiration to get you through. I remember this like it was yesterday, and I was flipping through the cards and I'd brought them with me. I had used them a handful of times just to kind of pause and make me meditate and think on things before, even though again, I didn't really attribute it to a higher power, but more of just tapping into my own inner power and inner strength. The first card I flipped to was labeled the Angel of Justice. And it had Lady Justice on the card holding the scales, the justice scales. And I just remember looking at that card and taking a deep breath and saying, justice. I deserve justice. I am strong enough to be here. Justice will prevail, and the bad people will be punished and the good people will be victorious. I know that life doesn't always work that way, but for whatever reason, despite all my abuse growing up and not seeing a lot of justice, I do really have faith in the justice system in many ways. I know people are probably going to disagree with that because there's also many, many people who've been failed by the justice system. But at that moment in time, that was really reassuring to say these people in the jury box are going to see what we all see, that he's a bad person, he's done very bad things, and they're going to find justice for me. And so as I went onto the stand, it really clung to that internal belief in justice that it will prevail in the end, and that helped me through. Have a support system. Bring someone with you to court that can be your rock while you're there. Even if maybe you don't want them to listen to your testimony, you can have them wait outside, but have somebody present so that when you walk out, you have somebody to hold your hand, give you a hug, to be there for you, not to listen to the whole trial potentially, but really be there for you. During the first trial, I had my ex-husband there, and at the time we were much more happily married than obviously later when we got divorced. But it was really reassuring to know that he was in the audience and he was in my corner. My grandparents also came, and that was really nice because they were there to see the whole trial and to hear the facts and hear what the situation was. But I knew 100% that they were in my corner and that no matter what happened, they were going to love me no matter what. From a purely practical standpoint, the number one thing I would say is tell the truth. Nothing but the truth. Obviously, your lawyer is going to tell you the same thing. You're under oath. If you're found to be intentionally lying about something, you can be fined. You can go to jail. Tell the truth, even if it doesn't put you in the best light. We all make mistakes. You are not the one on trial here. Your abuser is the one on trial, and you're here testifying because you are a victim. We all naturally get very defensive. We've all done stupid things as teens, as adults, as whatever. It's really important to remember that honesty is super important, even if it was a mistake, it looks bad. During my testimony, they tried to bring up the bad behaviors I had as a teenager. Keep in mind, I was 24 when the first trial happened, 26 when the second trial happened, but they tried to bring up all this supposed bad behavior I had as a teenager. I got caught having sex with my boyfriend when I was like 16. I tried marijuana like 3 or 4 times as a teenager. They tried to make it sound like I was this horrible deviant and I was just a liar all the time. And of course, they're trying to make it look like I'm not credible. Totally understandable. That is the defense attorney's job, is to fight for their client. What I'm trying to say for this one is just don't try to pretend those things didn't happen. Like I said, we all make mistakes. They're part of your story and who you are. And the games the defense attorney are trying to play, I mean, the jury will see through that. So you don't have to be defensive. Just say, yeah, I tried marijuana when I was 16. I, drank some alcohol from the parents' cupboard. That is super not important in the grand scheme of things, but it's going to look really bad if you lie about them, especially because it's just so unnecessary. Know your timeline. This might sound a little wonky, but when I met with law enforcement the first time and they wanted to really understand what happened, I sat down and I wrote a very detailed timeline of events. Keep in mind, the abuse that I dealt with happened from the ages of 8 to 18. That's a 10-year spread. It was really hard to remember exactly when things happened. So I took a lot of time to figure out exactly when this happened. Was I 13? Was I 14? How did I remember? I said, well, I had this bedroom from this time to this time. Oh, and this abuse happened in this bedroom. So that must have been when I was this age. And so I was able to put together a very clear timeline and go, okay, I was a freshman. That means I was 12 or 13. Did I remember the exact month everything happened? No. And it's not really necessary. The jury knows that you're not going to remember if you were 8.5 or 8 3/4 when the abuse started. But what I found is by working and putting that detailed timeline together, it really helped me to organize my thoughts, especially when you're a victim of ongoing abuse. The more significant events stand out more prominently, and those ones you can probably recite in a second. When did that happen? Where did it happen? What were you wearing? Etc. But sometimes there's a lot, and in my case, there were hundreds of less significant incidences of molest, and that spanned, again, a decade. So how do you really pinpoint how many times did it happen? Did it happen 110 times or 120 times? It's very challenging to do that. So putting together that detailed timeline really helped me. I will say that I wouldn't recommend you bring it into court, but I did bring it on the stand during the preliminary hearing, and the defense attorney was a total jerk about it. Again, that is the defense attorney's job, is to ask the hard questions and try to advocate for their client. He was asking me things like, oh, you mean you can't remember when the order things happened? Or, just trying to be really accusatory, trying to make it look like I'm an idiot, when the reality is I'm extremely mentally organized, which is why I did that in the first place. It's because I wanted to be as precise as possible. But I would say don't bring that reference material to the stand because it's just going to cause more problems than it's worth. But it might help you, like it helped me, to just have that as a reference. And as you're trying to relax and de-stress before you go into the courtroom, it can be one of those aids that you look over and go, am I clear on the timeline? Yes, I am. And you can kind of go through it and help make sure that you're solid. I don't know if the attorney would recommend that. This is my personal advice. I'm not a lawyer. But again, this is what was super helpful for me. One of the biggest advice I got from several different attorneys I've talked to over the years is always pause before answering a question. Never anticipate what the question's going to be. Don't anticipate your answer. When they ask you a question, take a breath and think about what they're asking you and really make sure you're only answering that question. You're not going to elaborate. You're not going to expand on it. The other reason you might want to pause is that, for example, if the defense attorney is asking you questions, the district attorney needs an opportunity to object. As you take that deep breath and compose yourself, it also gives the district attorney the opportunity to go, no, we're not going to talk about this. This is an unacceptable question, which you may not always know, is that acceptable or not, because that's not your job. Your job is to answer questions, not to know whether they're ethical or able to ask or not. That's what the attorney is for. To tie along with that is make sure you're giving clear and concise answers only. Give direct answers to the best of your ability. Don't try to tell your story in your own way. The district attorney's job is to ensure that your story as a victim is told in a way that is going to be best received by the jury and understood by the jury. It's really easy to want to go into a tangent and tell a story and start rattling off your experiences, but don't do that. It's not a monologue situation. Format is clear. Ask a question, answer a question. My mother, who was on my father's side, defending him, trying to say none of this ever happened, had a very specific narrative that she wanted to get out, and she kept going on these tangents trying to explain things. And so she got her hand slapped by the judge several times. And so don't do that. This is not your job to tell that story. Your job is to answer those questions clearly, concisely, give the details when details are asked, but it's not necessary to go on an elaborate tangent. If they want more information, they will ask for it. Remember that the defense attorney is against you. So the district attorney is the one supporting you. They're on your side. They're your friend. They're there to tell your story, get you justice. The defense attorney is not that they're your enemy per se, but they're there to represent your abuser. They are there to make sure that they receive a proper defense, which is great. That is why the justice system exists, so people get a fair trial. It is very important. However, your defense attorneys are not always the most ethical or nice people. I will tell you that I interacted with the defense attorney on several occasions, and he felt like one of the slimiest, manipulative people I've ever met. And that was just my personal opinion of him. He was gross, and just the way he talked to me was awful. The good news is I went in having met him thinking this guy is toxic. Be careful. He's a little crazy. And he tried to do this whole schmoozing thing with me before the trial started. And I'm like, I'm not talking to you. You're defending my father. What is happening right now? One thing about the defense is that they're typically going to ask you yes or no questions, because what they're trying to do is frame your answers in a way to tell a story that's in favor of the defendant. And they're trying to help your abuser. They don't usually want you to elaborate on your answer, because then again, you're telling that story that usually goes against your defendant. So it's okay. You have to be okay with that. You're going to get two very different questioning styles typically from the district attorney versus the defense attorney. The district attorney wants you to tell your story and how that made you feel and the impact it had on your life. And the defense attorney is going to want the opposite, which is how do we make this sound as bad as possible for you, the victim, and as good as possible for the defendant. Just tell your story, answer their questions, even if they're just yes or no questions. And if it's important, the district attorney will or should, if they're good, circle back and ask you for clarifying questions so that the jury can get a full understanding on the situation if it's needed. Speaking of asking for clarity, it is very important to ask questions and get clarification before answering if you don't understand the question. Don't guess as to what the question means. If you don't know what it means, you need to ask for understanding. I found that the defense attorney was always trying to ask these weird bundled questions or trying to insert things into the question and trying to recite it back to me later and say, well, you said this. I'm like, no. I was answering the first part of the question, not the second part of the question. And he was trying to muddle me up. So it's really important to, again, take that pause that we talked about earlier. Make sure you understand the question they're asking. And if you don't understand, ask for clarification, ask them to restate the question. The district attorney should also, again, be on your side. And if there's a super wonky question, they should help push for clarification if it doesn't make sense or if it's too vague. Definitely take that opportunity, know what you're answering before you answer. The next thing I'll say is that it's okay to be emotional. It is really hard to get on the stand and testify against your abuser and talk about the things they did to you, talk about those really intimate and very troublesome details of why you're there in the first place, right? Going through every incident of abuse and every feeling and every struggle. And then, of course, talking about that impact on your life after is really intense, really emotional. And it's okay to ask for 5 minutes if you're having a hard time, you're really emotional, you're crying. You can ask the judge and just say, can I have 5 minutes? Get some tissues. In my experience, you'll get it. And I was told in advance, like, hey, if you're having a hard time, raise your hand and we'll get you 5 minutes. It's really hard. I mean, the worst they can tell you is no, but in my experience, they're not going to say no. The other thing I'll say is make sure you have water and tissues nearby. It can be a lot. Like I said, I've testified 3 times. I think I testified probably over 30 hours plus combined in those 3 trials. The last trial in itself was I was on the stand for 2 days. So making sure you have water, keep your throat from getting sore. If you need to bring like throat lozenges, I would actually really recommend those too. But staying hydrated, super important. Bring snacks to eat during break time so that you're not dealing with hunger pangs that will distract you as well. You really want to have a clear head while you're on the stand. The next thing I'll say is that it's okay to not remember. As a people pleaser, one of the things that I caught myself doing, or actually the judge caught me doing, is they'd ask a question, I wouldn't remember doing that, and I'd say things like, that probably happened, that sounds reasonable, or that might have happened, instead of actually just saying, I don't remember, or I don't have recollection of that event happening. And the judge actually interrupted and said to me, Janae, it's okay if you don't remember to say, I don't remember, or I don't recall. And it's really important, again, stand by your truth. By saying things like, that probably happened, it might have happened, it makes it look like you remember it happening and you didn't. It's okay. That's all I'm trying to say. It's okay to not 100% remember everything in your entire life that happened. Trauma is so damaging, and I think this is really important for all of us to remember. Trauma is very damaging. We block things out. We don't remember. We may have gaps in our memories, intentional or not intentional, and that's okay. So be your authentic self. It's okay to say, I don't recall. It doesn't mean that you're a bad witness or you're giving bad testimony if you don't remember that exact situation they're asking you about. A big one that I want to talk about is dealing with your anger beforehand. Are you angry that you were abused? You probably are. If you're not anymore, you probably were at one point. It's totally normal to be angry. Anger can be very healthy. Anger is how I finally got the drive to actually prosecute and work with law enforcement. Is somebody helped me find that anger that I'd never been allowed to have before. So anger can be super valuable and super beneficial, but depending on the kind of anger, it can also come across as very vindictive or very negatively to the jury. Not to say that you should act a certain way to impress the jury. You shouldn't. You should be your authentic self. But what you don't want to be going in is a bundle of anger, just steaming and mad at your abuser. You might feel like that at times, but you really should work on that before you get on the stand. It can come across very badly to the jury in a way that you don't want, or that biases them against you, unfortunately. Even though anger can be very helpful, dealing with any overwhelming or extreme feelings of anger is going to not only help you mentally to get through this experience, but it's also going to help you remain calm, cool, collected. Keep that clear head as you deal with the defense attorney and the district attorney, answering their questions and reliving this if you're not just overwhelmed with anger. So definitely recommend getting a good therapist, talk through it, work through those feelings beforehand. My brother is a really good example of how anger actually damaged him, or would have damaged him, in court. My brother is actually now deceased, but when he was a teenager, he reported to his social worker or whoever his carer was at the boys' home that he lived in that my father had molested him. But my brother was such an angry teenager, and he was just so vile and filled with hatred and anger, and you know, he just reeked of it, that he unfortunately didn't come across as a credible witness. And of course, many abuse cases, as you all know, it often end up in a he said, she said. I was very fortunate. I got a confession. In my brother's situation, it was he said, she said, and he just wasn't a credible witness. And so as my court case came up and the district attorney was looking at who would testify, my brother's name came up, and she had looked at the records and talked to my brother, and she's like, he is so angry at the world, at the universe, at my father, at my mother, at everyone, that he just wouldn't be a good witness. My brother was very troubled when he was alive, and I love him dearly, but he was just not credible. And so it's something to keep in mind, is that if he had gone on the stand, he would have been destroyed by the defense attorney, and they would have ripped him apart in terms of his testimony. He wouldn't have looked credible. The jury would have looked at that unfavorably, and so he was never called to the stand. And unfortunately, that means that whatever did happen to him, which of course we'll never know exactly what did happen or didn't happen, he's now deceased. We'll never find justice for that. But because he couldn't keep himself in check to be a reliable witness, he wasn't able to at least testify to his experiences to show my father's character. Long story short, what I'm saying is get your mental health in order. The district attorney is there to help you, and they're here to help get justice for us and for you, but you need to also help yourself. Dealing with your emotional issues beforehand is going to help you so much, not just on the stand, but in your life. It's really easy to get overwhelmed with the feelings of anger and sadness from, your abuser took away a huge part of you, a huge part of your feelings of safety, your feelings of security, your feelings of love, your feelings of autonomy of your body, and they've stolen a lot from you. Don't let them steal your peace as well. Really important to not let the damage they've done take hold and take over your whole life. Don't let them win by letting that happen. So many abusers, get off on the control they have. And so you're only letting them have more control if you let them dominate your feelings and your anger for so much time and so long. I'm not saying that you should forgive your abuser. I'm not saying you should not be angry. I'm not saying any of that, because that's BS, right? It is totally valid to be angry at the people who hurt you and abused you. But I can honestly say that going to therapy and learning to let go of some of those feelings of anger has given me so much more emotional peace over the years than I had before. I still deal with anxiety. I still deal with lingering depression. But at the same time, I am a survivor. And I want you to be a survivor. And I really feel like, aside from this whole testifying in court thing, Don't let them win. If anything, let any anger you have fuel you in the direction of getting justice. Fuel you in reaching out for help, reporting your abuser, telling the people who can actually do something about it. If you're angry, that's where you should funnel that into anger, because it can be so self-destructive. And that is the last thing I want for you, and I think you want for you, is to let those feelings of anger destroy you and rot out your soul. Get therapy. Be prepared. Don't be a crazy, angry person on the stand. It won't look good for you. And just tell the truth, right? Tell the truth, the whole truth, and you'll be all right. One of the biggest things is listen to the rules the district attorney gives you. So prior to testifying, the district attorney should have reviewed any rules that the court may have regarding the testimony or regarding topics you are not allowed to speak about with you. So, for example, I wasn't allowed to discuss certain topics about my father's affairs because they thought it would be biasing of the jury. So I was told, don't talk about X, Y, and Z. Remember those rules and don't break them during your testimony. The district attorney should not be coaching you on how to answer questions, but in my experience at least, they should be telling you what questions they're going to ask. And if they don't know the answer, they may ask you those and say, hey, if I was to ask you this question, what would your answer be? And that's for them to make sure that they can prepare their case and prepare any follow-up questions they're going to need to get those answers presented to the jury in the way that they need them presented to tell your story. The great thing about that advance review of those questions is it should give you an idea of the questions that are going to come up and time to think about the emotions that are going to come up as you talk through those experiences. Obviously, a lot of emotions come up as you discuss the trauma you've experienced. And so it gives you a lot of opportunity to kind of process that before you even get on the stand. The other thing the district attorney is, of course, going to remind you of is telling the truth. I don't think we can harp on that enough. But also really important to remember is if the judge is talking, don't talk. As I read the transcripts from my father's trial, there's a couple times where somebody was interrupting, not me, somebody was interrupting the judge, and the judge does not like that. The judge does not like that. So make sure if the judge starts talking, pause, wait, and then continue when they tell you to. And then last but not least, I really want you to remember that you deserve justice. It may not always happen. The justice system is not perfect, but the opportunity to testify on the stand was one of the most liberating things I have ever done. I was able to tell my story. I was able to call out my abuser and all the terrible things he did to me. I was able to put it into the universe that he's a bad, toxic, horrible person that he is, and I was able to show that he no longer has control over me. And that was huge. I had been controlled by him for so many years. So many years. I'd been controlled and manipulated. It was so healthy and it was so beneficial to my journey for recovery to take that opportunity to be on the stand. I was extremely fortunate to have that opportunity to be on the stand, process those feelings, face my abuser, and just call him out. Call him out for the universe to see. You deserve justice too. You deserve the peace of mind to know that you've done everything you can possibly do to get justice. Even if it doesn't happen and you don't get justice, I truly believe that testifying in court against your abuser is one of the healthiest and most liberating things you can possibly do to yourself as part of your own recovery journey, and to show that you're stronger than your title as a victim of domestic and sexual violence. You are more than just a victim. You are a survivor, and you are standing up for yourself, and you're taking ownership of yourself, and you deserve justice. Even if that justice isn't in the form of a conviction, at least you've had that opportunity to tell your story, and you can say, I've done everything in my power to make this happen. So anyway, that was a lot longer than I expected. For those of you who've gone through a similar journey or had to testify against your abuser, what other suggestions do you have? Any other tips that you'd recommend for people going through this experience? What's the best advice you got from either your attorney or someone around you before you got on the stand? Anything I missed? I'm sure there's 1,000 suggestions and a million other ways to do things. This, as a reminder, this is just my personal advice. I'm not a lawyer. Obviously, your lawyer may have some other things for you to do or not do that may be a little different than what I've recommended. But this was what worked for me. It was very beneficial, and I think it really did help with the conviction process, is to kind of have my head in a cool place as I move forward. So hopefully this helps you. I really do. And I really wish you the best of luck on your journey. And with that being said, thanks for listening in. I'm Janae Cherie, and I'm here to tell my stories. Bye.